Okay, so here we go. Basically what we're going to start off doing is just doing the UVs for pretty much every piece on the character so that when we actually get down to texturing we can just do all of it at once. We could just go part by part if we wanted, but this way it makes it getting all the boring part out of the way. But I think there's a couple good little things to know about UV mapping in Max 8, and we're also going to use Deep UV, which is a great program if you have access to it. Don't believe it's in production anymore, but the old version still has a few features that I find really useful. But Max 8 has some great features as well that can double for everything that it does. So basically I'm just going to separate a couple parts here. You can see I'm going to break off the body into two parts, a left and a right. Actually, I'm just going to put it on symmetry for now, but later on we will be doing a left and a right because he has a wound on one part of his arms. And also, in case we want a little bit of dirt on the neck, it's better to kind of break up the whole body. We could do it all as one UV map as well for the body, but for this case I'm just going to do it. So we really only have to do one map, and then we can either layer it or just in Photoshop make a separate map that has the dirt and blood and stuff on it. So, but we're going to start doing the UVs on his head. I'm just going to hide a few things here. Turn on back face culling. I want to make sure that nothing's poking through. Alright, so here we go. You can go into the modifier list, or if you just right click on modifier list, you can actually just change it to a UV. All the UV controls basically are at your fingertips this way. I almost always have that on and don't really use anything but that in that area, since most all my other commands for modeling are really in my hotkeys. So I'm just going to clean up a few areas that I think might be kind of a pain in the butt to UV. The nose being this big N-gon right here, I'm going to fix that. So even though this DVD is going to focus on doing mostly just textures, I will be doing some modeling edits as well. I find a lot of times when I'm actually working on a character and I think the modeling's just fine and dandy, and I actually get the textures on there, that some areas don't really work as well. So I get to move it around, or even maybe use the textures as a guideline to maybe model in wrinkles or extra details I just didn't think about at the time. So we're just going to start with a simple cylindrical mapping on this guy. I'm not going to worry too much about the top of the head being too clean because he's going to have hair, so I don't need to make sure that there's plenty of textures in there. I have kind of a strange UV tool here. You can download it. I'll put it in the notes for here. There's a plugin you can download that gives you a lot of these options, some very nice ones. But also Blur's done some edits on there. I know they're not available right now yet, but we do plan on eventually releasing a lot of our scripts and stuff to the general public, like we always do. But here I'm going to take his mouth cap out as a separate object, and at the very end I'll merge it all back together. But I know that area, it's just going to cause a little bit of trouble when I start to unwrap him. And with so much shadow and stuff, it's really going to be hard to see anything in there anyway. It left a few areas. I'm going to speed up a bit here because this gets a little repetitive. But basically, if you actually go into your edit mode for your unwrap, and then you do your cylindrical map, you can actually watch it in real time. And weird broken up middle path. Although they are still broken, if you look, you can see that the edges are a little bit highlighted in white. But we can put a weld with a really low threshold on there, and that'll fix that really quick. Or if you wanted to get fancy, we could go through and just do a target weld for each one in case it was messing up. So I'm going to start here. Basically in this toolbar you have two things. You have the relax and relax 2. They're the same things under the UV editor. There's two different types of relax as well. There's a relax and a relax dialog. So I just did a simple relax at first just to kind of smooth everything out a little bit. And now you see I'm changing under the relax dialog to relax by face angles. Cranking the iterations up, and I'm cranking the amount up to the max, which is 1. You could go with the iterations up quite a bit higher, but I find 1,000 to be a pretty good amount where you can kind of move things around and see how it works. I'm also moving his mouth a little bit farther apart, just because when I do this relaxed stuff, sometimes it'll start to overlap on these areas that are open. His eyes are an area that we're going to have to watch out for, and his mouth. And by using the fall off with a few different settings, I can make sure that it really follows the edges of the UVs as opposed to following their space on the grid. So I turn the edge distance on, and now I can just separate this whole mouth area a little bit quicker. And some areas still may kind of go over, so just gotta kind of adjust stuff here and there. And in the mouth corners, because of what we're gonna be doing, I'm just gonna relax it quite a bit. And just get everything kind of in position. As you can see, it starts folding in on itself when I use that relax tool, so it's not quite perfect. It doesn't quite do all the work for you. It is great though. It does solve a lot of the problems. What's really dependent on is your actual layout of your UVs here. As you can see, I just ran it right there on the whole thing, and you can see how all the squares on this map that I made, they're pretty much even now. They're pretty good. But Deep UV has a very similar relax algorithm, I guess. It does a very similar result at very least. So, but there's a few things in Deep UV I like. I like the join tool, which you can just select everything, and unless they're actually connected on the mesh, it won't just weld points at random, which the Max one will. Stitch should fix that, but I find Stitch to be kind of buggy. So I still use Deep UV whenever I start having problems in the Max Relax tool here. Okay, now just keep in mind that when you export these OBJs, just like the ZBrush, you want everything to be on channel 1. It won't follow channel 2, and it won't be able to edit on channel 2, so just put it on channel 1. You might wonder why we say that, but if you've used Brazil before, you know that the skin shader needs an UVW to XYZ on channel 1. It's how it makes its pores. And you can see I'm running this relax tool. Really the only two tools, maybe three tools I use in here are the join, the cut, the lift, and the relax. I guess that's 4 tools. But they're all under the tools area. Sometimes I'll use the actual unwrap things for planars and for cylindricals. I'm just relaxing it by area right now because I found when I grab the whole thing, it's going a little too crazy. So you get this little dialogue. I have dual monitors on my system, so sometimes these things will pop up off the screen. So I'm trying to drag them over quick enough that you can see them. But when you run the relax, there's a stop option, and you can get to watch the progress bar. If it starts folding in on itself, you just can stop it and undo it, or just stop it before it starts doing that, and then do it by little chunks. And just like in Max, the actual layout and width and everything of your UV set and your selection will actually change how the relax tool around a 0. So I want to make sure there's plenty of space in there and there's nothing overlapping. That's the most important part at this point. We're going to be using body paint, ZBrush, other things to do projection mapping, where if your UVs are a little bit streamy, like you can see on the nose, and a little weird in the neck, I'm not going to concern myself too much because there's enough space there that I'll be able to just take it into body paint, ZBrush, what have you, and really project on there, just kind of see, and it'll pretty much do the work for me at that point. But you want to make sure there's actually enough space on your map. Otherwise, you're just kind of going to be really trying hard to get something to work that just shouldn't be working. Then you'll have to figure out a way to do it with either masks or with random little cheats and stuff. But just try and keep everything so there's at least a little bit of UV space. I have a little computer freeze here. I'm going to go over a few different things in here that we can do once the computer wakes back up. We're going to have, here we go. Once we do this head, we're going to go through all the parts of the body, and I'm going to try and do different types of UVs on everything, so you can kind of see how every different tool can be used. And they can all be interchanged on different parts. It's just the best tool for the best job. If we compare the two, you can see what the Max Relax did, and we can see what the Deep UV Relax did. It's a little unfair because the Deep UV one's a lot bigger, so it makes it look a lot. Checkerboard pattern is just something I like to use to make sure that everything's pretty much even. Now you can see even Deep UV had some areas where it folded in on itself, but they're pretty easy to fix. I can use Max's nice little tool here, and it'll solve a lot of these areas if I just go by the little selections. I cranked it up to 5,000 because I know it's going to have to move a lot of points around. And sometimes when you use this tool, it'll break your UVs, and then you'll think you should stop it, but maybe if you let it go, it'll actually start to solve it. It kind of spins it around and around and around until it starts to distance them in a nice fashion. But if it's not working, I'm just going to use the soft selection here and kind of spread out these areas because it's having trouble. And because it's a corner of the mouth and I just need the UV space, I'm just going to run a quick relax on here. And then try and give it the solver as well. and it's solving it pretty decently in that area. Then I'll just move these points around so that I have space to put texture on. And it's actually pretty even on the checkers right now. It's going to be just fine to take into Photoshop in a few. So we'll just relax these little corners of the mouth, and then move the points that fall on top of them. Want to make sure there's a little bit of detail in the scar area. A lot of these types of areas will sometimes fold in on themselves, but it'd be fun to put some sort of gooey kind of texture in there. Even though I don't probably think it would be a fresh scar, we're gonna take some creative licensing with the texturing on this project. Not quite photoreal, but still fairly realistic textures. But want to have a little fun with it, really. And then the eyes, I want to make sure there's plenty of space in here for the eyes to have some nice texture on them. And I like to keep the eyes pretty much closed when I'm texturing, because when he blinks, a lot of times you might leave the eyes open, and then in the animation he blinks and there's some very strange stretching. Now this area is going to be a little tricky because we added that little area in the last DVD where his eye is kind of, the skin melted on top of itself, and it's kind of gross looking where the scar kind of healed over the eye. So we're going to have to break this off because none of these relax tools are going to work too well. But if we break off an area and then do the relax, you can do this in deep UV as well. Really the only area that's causing too much trouble. So using Polyboost, it has some great UV tools such as loop select, ring select. You can grow and shrink rings. You can even do UV tweaking, which I don't do too much on this DVD. I don't find it to be the most useful thing. But every so often you might find one area that's just stretching a little weird, and if you just use that, you can just kind of tweak it right into the right place. So it's a good tool to play with. So once again, even on the texturing side, Polyboost does kind of help out a lot. Especially when we start doing belts later on, and we'll be able to just flatten everything out pretty nicely. Or UV coordinates to move as opposed to, you know, the entire head. And once again, in this area, I just want to make sure that all of this has enough space on the texture map that I'll be able to paint some color and bump and normal maps. And if we're going to go really crazy, we could do displacement maps for this character. But we're not going to do that because we don't really use displacement maps at work. We're using Brazil. A lot of poly modeling at the studio with just extra details in the normal maps, which is what we're going to use ZBrush for in this project. Just wrinkles, and so now we just scale this kind of into place. That's really a pretty simple manner of just moving a few points around, snapping them into place. Now in Deep UV, if I just grab this entire mesh besides the edges and hit the join button, it would just figure out exactly where to put these. But if you don't have access to it, this is usually what I do. It goes pretty quick when you get used to it. Make sure everything's welded up. Make sure these corners, we're going to use a little tool called Quick Dirt, which kind of throws a dirty pass over all the crevices. You can invert it and do all sorts of really great little quick tricks to kind of bake in a little bit of texture detail. We want to keep this a little organized because his nose got a little stretchy, and then you can see here this got pretty messed up. So we move that around. UV mapping is really just an exercise in patience, I find. It's pretty simple. Very short times. I think this whole character, we did every UV for him in, I'd say under an hour for every piece. It could have been, what, about an hour. Some areas might have a little bit more trouble, but it shouldn't. With these tools, it really shouldn't take you much more than a few hours to do an entire character. Just a matter of patience. And it does really make things a lot easier to have everything ready to go, so you're just kind of in a texturing mindset, and you don't have to go back to this. And you can see here I'm just scaling down the head. These areas are where the hair map is going to go. And I know all it's going to be is white and black back there, so I don't need there to be a lot of space. It's just taking up room, really. I don't want to waste any kind of space for this texture. But I also don't want to separate it and use it as a separate map and have to do a mask or anything, because that's just more seam painting, and seam painting is dirt, and I'm going to have to make sure that the dirt, the specular map, and the normal maps and everything match up. Luckily with body paint, that's a very easy solution and very quick to do. You can see this kind of folds in on itself again. But if you keep your selection small, this stuff works really well. So the basic idea on this type of UV map is really just start big, get the basic feel for it, and there we go. We've pretty much got the whole UV set done for this. Snap it into place, and let's do the jacket now. Something like a jacket, a body, even an arm with these tools, I find it better, instead of trying to say, okay, well the sleeve is going to be a cylinder, this part's going to be a box, this is going to be this. I just do a front and a back, and then I weld the middle points where I want it to go, and then I run these relax tools now, which just saves so much time in trying to figure out how to have it have a nice clean UV layout. And luckily with stuff like clothes, usually there are seams in the clothes, so you just kind of, if you just put the seam of the UV right where the seam of the clothes is, it solves a lot of the problem of having to fix seams up later on in the actual texture. And I'm just using the brush select in max, which is kind of a so I'm just going to use it, and now I'm just kind of picking each little point. Alright, so I mentioned in the last one, I believe, that in the last DVD, that when you do these projection maps and anything projection related for UVs, look just fine until you generate your normal maps in ZBrush, and there's a few tricks that kind of work, but it's just not. It's just more trouble than it's worth. If you just make sure that you're actually facing the direction of the polygons where the normals point out, then it'll solve that problem right away. So you can see we just did a really quick planar maps on the collar on 2 different parts, and we broke this up into basically 3 parts for the main jacket. And I'm just going to use the great little join command over in Deep UV, and we'll see just how quick this goes. Grab that, click the join button, looking at the way this is laid out. Don't relax on it. I might want to move I think it's getting a little long, so I'm going to be wasting some text. Actual mesh. I don't see any reason to do it on this. So then I want to pull this out, because like I said earlier, this whole deep UV thing is really where you put the edge points. It kind of helps solve how the UVs relax. Now deep UV just had a bit of a crash, so I jumped ahead again. So you're very lucky you get to watch me re-UV this jacket. But it should give you a pretty good impression of just how quick you can UV something fairly complicated. This jacket has a lot of stuff going on in it, and we're going to get it to a point where we could take this into Photoshop and have a completely seamless map, and it's really only going to take us about, if it was in real time, maybe about 5 minutes. Now, one of the drawbacks with Deep UV is it can be kind of buggy, so you have to be careful. We've had problems on our machines where just simply undoing will actually crash Deep UV. it's a nice little piece of software. It's all the commands are also Photoshop based. So L is for lasso and M is for selection marquee. So it keeps things pretty quick. And now you can see, look at how clean these UVs are. If we look at this, some of these areas got a little messed up, but by running the max relax, we'll actually fix that right away by running just a couple simple, the normal old school style relaxes. And then we run the relax by face angles again. There's a few different options also. You have relax by face, relax by edge, and relax by, I believe it's face centers. But I haven't really gotten them to work too great. So we actually had quite a bit of trouble trying to use this before, and Z Jones, who will be coming out with a DVD pretty soon, she came up with a great, she found the solution actually to make this work really well. So thank you to Z for figuring this out. Now I'm just fixing these areas. I can see that this should have been on one side and the other one should have been on the other side. But it's really not that hard to fix anymore. It's just kind of having a sense of your UVs and knowing what faces are doing what. And I think that kind of comes with time. So for anyone new to UVs, you might find them pretty frustrating, but once you get used to them, they become pretty much second nature. It's just kind of untangling. It's almost like a little bit of a puzzle. You can see everything looks pretty even on this side now, but this should be on the other side down there. So we're going to try and use that stitch tool, but it doesn't work too well. It makes quite a mess. So I'm just going to move this stuff into place. I get a little set in my ways. When I find a program I really like, I'll kind of stay with it. So that's one reason I like going back to Deep UV a lot. So those two guys are kind of floating weird. We don't need those. This guy's floating weird. We'll put him over here. I'm going to speed stuff up a little bit now. So because of this, I don't want to go through and target weld each one of these. I'm just going to go through and join. So I'm just grabbing these points, joining, relaxing. Grabbing these points, joining, relaxing. Didn't quite work too well, so I'll move the points myself. As good as it is, it won't solve everything for you, but it'll solve a lot. If it even gets rid of 75% of the grunt work, then I think it pays for itself. This used to be my least favorite part of the entire process, and now it's just kind of a minor inconvenience. Now we're just going to do the body. We're going to do the body the same way we did the same way that we did the jacket, with a front and a back projection, and then we're just going to weld them. And actually, I'm going to split the part of the body we're never going to see because he's wearing a jacket and the tank top. And the texture space will be there if we really wanted to use it, but we don't really need it. So I'm just going to kind of put it small onto the side. Now, another reason I also deleted one half of this body, anything that you have that's symmetrical, even if you think you're done with your modeling, say you have pouches all over the place, which he does, I didn't keep them instanced in the model, which is one solution as well. But the fact that I didn't keep them instanced means that I'd have to go through and UV map every single one, straps or anything like that can be used again and again. If you kind of lay it out in the model, then you can just UV one of them and then put them back in place once you've UV'd one. Just those kind of little cheats that'll save you a lot of time and kind of common sense, but as you see here, I'm just kind of rotating these so I can join them together. Collapse this down to channel 1. We're going to bring it into Deep UV, but first we want to do a couple little edits here. I'm just going to relax this stuff a bit. Rotate it so it's kind of flat. And then I'm going to use Max's relax tool because it does have some nice nice ways of doing things. And if you look at here, I just use the loop tool by grabbing. What's great in Polyboost is if you grab two verts that are going one way and you click the loop button, it'll figure out what you meant. And if you hit the ring button, it'll figure out what you meant by that too. Now, instead of using Deep UV here, I'm just going to actually use the join tool on the edges, just to show it. It's a quick way to weld stuff if you want to. And when there's only like, I think what, like 15 edges right there, jumping back and forth between two programs sometimes doesn't make sense. Alright, let's see how this We could always set them into different face ID and put them over the arm as well. Okay, the glove, it's also a very similar thing here. I'm going to delete the one on the other side because they're symmetrical. There's no need to do UVs on both of them. And then here I'm actually going to use the cylinder map on his little cuff. But you could do a planar on the top and bottom and just break it at the seams. But this should work pretty well. I did the ignore back facing on here. And then I shrank it a few times just to, because sometimes it'll grab some weird areas and I might not even notice it until it's too late. The thumb kind of got lost a little bit, so we'll have to do some selecting there. You can see it goes really quick though. And if your model's laid out pretty clean, which these gloves are pretty clean about where a seam would go, this shouldn't take very much time at all. I'm using that brush select again, and it's grabbing stuff on the other side of the object, even though I have ignore back facing, back face calling on, and we're just gonna... Alright, so we got the top, boom. Go to the bottom. Like I was saying before, you want to make sure that you're actually facing the direction. And if at all possible, try and keep them even where the projection will go. So when we look at this, we'll see what happened. I have a feeling it should be pretty quick, yeah. So that didn't do too well, but we're just going to run, once we're in the edit UVW, we're going to run the cylindrical again, because it just seems to be a little bit cleaner when you run it from inside the edit, and you can actually see it in real time, which is nice. And then back to deep UV. And like I said, a lot of these tools, you could pretty much get away with doing them just in Max, but I find it to be just a little bit faster in here. Then I'm running the relaxes. And then we just relax this thing a couple times. It's pretty much good to go at this point. We're just going to pack it into place and put this on there, look at it. Looks really even to me, except that little webbing area is a little bit weird, and you can see why. So I relax it a few times, then run the face angles on it, and it gets pretty good. Now there's options under the UV tools in Max where you can watch it update in real time. You don't have to just wait until it finishes, but for what we're doing now, this is fine. I'm just going to move these points around real quick. You can see we're missing a few faces there that should be there. It's on the other side here. But I know we're going to have a dark area along those seams. I don't know how much time I want to spend on it, but I might spend a little bit of time and fix it up. But for now, let's just find a good way to put these two gloves together. This is where the Tetris playing comes into play, where you really want to figure out how stuff can best fit onto your little 0-1 square here, or 0-0 square, I guess you'd say. Now what's cool is in ZBrush, you can see that Max has kind of a darker square around this 0-0 area. If you laid out all your maps all the way along in the correct spacing, it'll be able to, ZBrush will actually group your object accordingly, and you can just quickly hide those areas, and using the ZMapper tool, you can make maps dependent on UV sets, which is really great. So, because ZBrush doesn't really support multi-face ID characters, or I guess objects, models, but it's a big part of our pipeline here. And this all comes down to preference, how much you want to put into it. I like to have fairly clean UVs though, in case someone else has to work on this. There's nothing worse than having to work on someone's model who did a like just an automatic UVs or something, and you just have these crazy broken up things. You have to go into a UV, or excuse me, a painting program to actually do any kind of texture edits. Someone can open your Photoshop file and say, oh, okay, those are pants. Then you've done your job well. Okay, now we're going to use the pelt tool. So what I did there was I just painted the point-to-point scene. It's a pretty cool tool. I don't know if it's going to really work for this shape. But I kind of wanted to show it. We might show it on a different object instead. Yeah, this is probably going to be a little crazy on this shape. I probably could do a better with the relax tools and the join tools, this seems to be really the quickest way to do any kind of UV mapping for me. And you get some pretty clean results that are really easy to paint. So there. So I just did a front and back, just like we've done before. And I'm going to split the back. And then we're just going to take and then we're just going to run the relax tool. We'll see the middle where the crotch is got a little bunched up, but it's pretty clean overall. Try and solve it as best as Deep UV can figure out, but Max seems to have a little bit better options for this kind of stuff. Also, I don't like the whole selecting points in Deep UV. You have to go to a lasso or a marquee select the point, then switch over to a move tool, then move it. So here we go. I'm just going to move that up because that's just going to be, I'm going to paint a little bit of a shadow in there. Anything you want and kind of get it out there. So then we got the boots, we got the pouches. Do a quick pouch right now so I can show you just how quick we can do something like this. And all we're doing on this type of object, and then a little button, do a little planar map on it. Let's take a look at this. Okay, that's the little, yep. And looking at those blue outlines, you can see where everything joins together, so it's pretty quick to get everything just in place to where we want this to be. And if you're curious what side actually connects to what, just grab those edges and you'll see where they go. So now we go back to Deep UV. Because this join tool, I wish Max had something quite as quick and easy to use. If anyone knows of anything, feel free to email me. Let me know. Or if anyone wants to write something. You have to actually draw over 4 points or 4 or more points. Select a face. And then you have the other one, which is by element. And that's just everything that's a UV set. Every UV group, I guess you'd say. And then I'm just joining all these areas, running the relax tool. I can see this got out of the way, so we'll move it up here. Yeah, just grab all this stuff. Make sure it's lined up. When we run the quick dirt, it doesn't understand overlap. and it'll get some weird results. Now this object's a full object, so the relax tool just won't work. So there's a few options we could do here. One, I'm trying to do, just to show you some of the options you've got. You've got unfolds, you've got vamp, you've got all this stuff that'll kind of break it apart into faces. Some work better than others with certain objects, and if it happens to work okay, then go for it. Use the join tools and get it into place. Just gonna join all this stuff. Now it's got kind of a weird cap on it, so the relax tool is gonna be hard. So I broke off the cap part, and we're gonna use max again for this part of it. Here it comes. It's really important to make sure your UV settings are exported correctly, because otherwise you'll have some welded verts, and you never want that. Especially if you just plan on copying UVs from it and to another object, which we'll go into later on about copying and saving UVs from one side to another. Now for this part, because I had a weird top to it, and there's no need for that top, I just deleted it in the actual mesh and duplicated this stuff around. So long as there's actual UV space, I'm happy with it. Duplicate this thing and put it into place for these other ones that I built. And then I'll just kind of move some verts around so they're not totally the same, but I'm going to speed stuff up here. We don't need to spend a million years watching me duplicate stuff. You can see just how fast you can actually fit these little objects back into place. And then just delete the old ones. And if these faces are weird because we don't need them down there, I'm just going to delete them. Make sure everything fits. And make sure your rotate stuff is from the center. Otherwise, you're going to rotate every different element separately. Okay, so here's the boot. I'm pretty sure this is the last thing we're going to do. We might do the holster as well. But this all kind of follows the same technique. So right here, I think you're going to get it just kind of a rough overview of everything we do. We select one side. And I hid the bottom of the sole because I'm going to do that just as a bottom projection. Because most characters in game cinematics, for us, we never look at the bottom of the foot. So I never really modeled too much in there. Just the vague idea of some kind of soul to it. And I'm just going to do that with textures in a normal map. So we're just going to use that join tool again, relax it again. These areas didn't work too good, so we're going to place them. We're going to relax on that. These guys I'm not going to worry too much about because I'm actually going to do the whole duplicate thing on these later on, but here we go. Okay. The boot's got some real clean UVs now. Now I really wasn't thrilled with these laces to begin with. Part of me kind of wants to rebuild them, but I'm not going to. I don't know the boot's not a very important part of this character. And then we just got to relax all this stuff because when we run, like I said earlier, when we run quick dirt, we want to make sure there's UV space everywhere. The more space, the better. But for this, just want to make sure there's a little bit because we're going to have some pretty high-res maps. Want to make sure all your maps are higher res than you imagine them being. Doesn't mean you have to go crazy, but at the very least make them 2K, 2048, and then you can always scale them back down. At Blur, we actually have a high res, a low res, and then a medium res for some projects. Some of our guys will make maps up to 4. Let's take a look at what we got left. We've pretty much got everything now. Last thing we have are these straps, which I had modeled some ribbing in earlier. I got rid of that because it's so fast to model that it's a little easier for us, the way we're going to do the UVs on these, to just delete them first and just have a vague idea of what we want here. And obviously on something like this, you're going to do a cylinder road map. And I want to delete the inside too because there's no reason for it. It's going to be hidden by the pants, so A, it's just wasted geometry. And also, when we do these UVs for the relax tool, if it's a closed mesh, it just kind of thins everything out and it doesn't understand how to solve it. So we want to delete those guys. Those guys. We're just going to duplicate this up. Kill that. If you've got a troublesome area like that, I don't know if you could see. It's all going to be pretty evenly aligned. And using that loop select for the UV skin cloth area of polyboost, we can really quickly select all the loop in one area. And then I'm just going to select each line and kind of organize it a little bit. Because we can use a tiled texture on this, which will save a texture space. And it's one map we don't have to spend a lot of time on later on. I'm using the Space Evenly tool that we have here. These UV tools are great. I'll make sure that I put on my notes where you guys can download the free one of this, and unless they've started to charge money for it, I don't believe they have though. In which case, I'm sorry, but just like Polyboost, it's one of those things I think it's really worth putting a little bit of money into. And now I'm just going to rebuild these things. I don't want to use the extrude and I don't want to use the chamfer because that will actually stretch your UVs, or rather not even make UVs.